Night City, 2045. Some wonder how this city has managed to stay alive. It's fractured, wounded. From its irradiated slums to the nano-built skyscrapers that separate the powerful and wealthy from the street gangs, the vendors, and the ordinary people just trying to run from the chaos. I was born 22 years ago. A year after the Fourth Corporate War began in 2022. Of course, my story really begins a bit earlier in 2020. My father always spoke of that year, actually the whole decade leading up to it, with a wistful look in his eye. Perhaps they were simpler times, the days of his youth, before data crash, before the time of the Red. Or maybe he just missed the Johnny Silverhand concerts that would spark riots, like the one in 2013. He was just a kid then. He met my mother in the outskirts of Night City, just before the carbon plague hit. The plague killed her whole family, and ravaged the city for 2 whole weeks. And then, it just stopped. No one knows why. Nearly 2 years later, deeply in love and busily preparing for my arrival, my parents heard that Chicago was being rebuilt and that good jobs could be found there. They planned to head out with a band of nomads, some distant relatives of my mother's. But before they could finish packing, communication was cut off as the net spiraled into chaos. Legendary netrunner Rache Bart Moss had been flatlined in a raid, and 2 weeks later, triggered by a dead man's switch he left behind, his data crash virus activated, turning the net into a dangerous wasteland, and in some cases, a raging battlefield. Not long after that, the Fourth Corporate War between Arasaka and MILITECH kicked off with a bang. Chicago was turned into a virus-riddled husk by Arasaka, since they'd rather let it turn to ash than let MILITECH gain control over it. All efforts to rebuild the city ceased, and my parents remained in Night City. Meanwhile, the data crash virus spread to almost 80% of the entire net. As if that wasn't enough, the space-dwelling high-riders decided they were sick of the corpos and their endless fighting. They officially declared their independence from us dirtsiders by dropping moon rocks on us. A man-made meteor shower all over the planet. The destruction across the world was devastating. By 2023, trade and supply lines had been disrupted worldwide. Megacorporations started falling one by one, and finally, on August 20th, a nuclear device detonated in Arasaka Towers, killing Johnny Silverhand and 500,000 other people in central Night City. Sunsets sure are pretty when the world is burning. I was born then, under the red glow. The time of the Red had begun. Father said they were tempted to name me after President Elizabeth KRESS. For a moment, she looked like hope, until she nationalized MILITECH, and the war raged on until 2025. When I was 2 years old, the Fourth Corporate War finally came to an end. Japan and the European Union managed to save themselves from destruction at the midnight hour. Hong Kong was not so fortunate. Devastated by bioweapons, nothing in that city lived. But, as one might expect in these kinds of situations, ghost stories began to spread. I heard them throughout my childhood. These rumors of an invisible AI hub, some kind of ghost world that lay beyond the 100-foot tall quarantine wall built to keep the bioplague contained. The ghosts would creep out every now and then, my friends told me. They'd slip into dark corners of the old broken net to find other AIs to join them. And wherever they went, the words of Alt Cunningham seemed to follow. Over the next 5 years, people displaced by the war began to seek out new homes. Father called it the diaspora. Nomads, my mother's people, came to their aid, guiding them to old settlements and cities that had been abandoned long ago during the collapse. Meanwhile, the last remnants of devastated megacorporations were stripped away by looters. Local businesses rose up to replace them, finding new life in the ruins of the lost era. Of course, Arasaka Corporation never seems content with peace. Having been confined to Japan after the war, it soon broke into 3 hostile factions. War seemed likely again, but at least now it was far away. Stateside, Elizabeth KRESS had basically become our new dictator. Dad was really happy he hadn't named me after her. By the time 2030 rolled around, we were finally able to move to the suburban areas of Night City. A little more room to grow. Just a little. Of course, the corpse had begun to grow again too, and the new nomad high roads sure helped as they started to branch out. The new corps did manage to establish some limited networks and data lines, so I guess they're good for something after all. I'll never forget that morning when Father read in some gossip rag that Johnny Silverhand's body had been found in some sort of cold storage body bank in the ruins of Old Night City. It's just a rumor. Actually, it's less than that. But Dad believes. I don't blame him. The thought kept him going through long hours of removing radioactive waste and rubble from the old central hub of the city. He sure missed Mum during those years. Still does. I guess I do too. I was a teenager before life started to take on some form of normality, as Dad puts it. 2035 to 2045 were a great 10 years. Lots of new cities were built, first waves they called them. With the new cities came new mega-corporations, of course. And Lord Empress KRESS, as Dad calls her, announced there would be no new elections until the country was whole again. At the time, I wasn't old enough to understand or even care about what that really meant. Now that I am, it worries me. More rumours. Dad starts saying that Morgan Blackhand, the world's greatest solo, had been spotted in some of the first wave cities. I keep telling him that's impossible. Morgan Blackhand was with Johnny Silverhand in Arasaka Towers when the bomb blew. They were both vaporized. But Dad is determined to believe something of the old resistance still lives on. He's got a new job now, working on some new thing called a mega building. Some sort of tech designed to create all-in-one safe habitable zones. Safe? I'll believe it when I stop hearing gunfire at night. I guess that brings me to today. Night City, year 2045. My 22nd birthday. I don't know why I recorded this. I guess it just feels like this is going to be an important year for some reason. I've started using the data pools, so maybe I'll put this vidlog on there and see if anyone wants to listen. I wonder where I and this city will be in another 22 years. One can only imagine.